All right, we are live on YouTube. We are live on Twitter. I think we're live on LinkedIn too. So, hello everybody. Welcome to our chat about therapy and Black boys. My name is Dr. Patrice Douglas. I am the CEO and founder of The Weight Room. The Weight Room is a full virtual mental wellness practice exclusively for Black and brown males ages 12 and up. Technically, we've been seeing kids younger than I think the youngest child we have seen thus far is 9 years old, but we have a full range of services for everybody. We have therapy, we have coaching, we have workshops, we have groups. Any and everything that can be helpful to Black and brown men, we have it. And we're located in 6 states. We are in California, Texas, New York, New Jersey, Georgia, Virginia. I think California, that I mentioned California. We're in a lot of different states. Hopefully we can expand to more in the future. Today, we have Dr. Earl Turner with us. Dr. Earl Turner is what we call a spotter at the Weight Room. We call our therapists and staff spotters at the Weight Room because we are helping you lift your emotional wellness into a healthier you. So as therapists, we are here to guide, we are here to coach, we are here to support. And let's be honest, for a lot of men, it feels like the world is very heavy. So we kind of use the Weight Room as like a gym concept to therapy. You can't just go in the gym just lifting everything, right? You got to, rehab yourself. You got to learn how to lift these heavy weights. And just sometimes the weights that you're trying to lift to make you stronger are doing the complete opposite. So we really work with you guys to make sure that the things that you are lifting are conducive to you. Or sometimes, like I just say, you got to let the shit go. So as a spotter in the Weight Room, that's what we do there. So we have Dr. Earl Turner. I'm going to give you a laundry list of what this amazing man does. He's an amazing clinician. He's an amazing colleague. So let's get into what the heck does Dr. Earl Turner not do, really? And that's not a lot. So he's a media psychologist. You have probably seen him in I would say hundreds of articles and publications at this point. He is the CEO of Therapy for Black Kids, which is really foundational of leading support about what our kids need, but he's also like a resource finder for those that don't know where to go. He also listens us at the Weight Room at Therapy for Black Kids, so we're appreciative. He's a published author. He has one book, and he has one releasing next year, so we are super excited. And the book that he's working on is really going to be foundational and helpful to the Black community. He's also a psychology professor and researcher. Did I miss anything? Because, a long list. What don't you do?
I think you got it all. What I don't do is probably sleep enough.
That's what he doesn't do, ladies and gentlemen. He doesn't sleep. And in the midst of his busy schedule, I just listed a bunch of things. Can you imagine trying to get that done in 40 hours a week? He exercises too. I just don't know. I don't know. He's got it all, right? So we're so happy to have you today, Dr. Earl. And I'm really excited to get in this conversation because, first of all, the fact that you got all that going on and then you still find time to work in the Weight Room is one thing, right? I don't know how you find the little hours that you have to be of support to our community. But I really want to get into what is your passion about working with Black boys and men. You work with both in the Weight Room, adolescents and adults. But I really want to know, where did your passion stem with working with Black boys?
Yeah. So I as I told this story sometimes, one of the things that I mentioned is that I've always been interested in working with kids and helping kids. Not necessarily in the therapy perspective. I always wanted to be a doctor, but not a doctor of the mind, which is what I am now. But I wanted to be a pediatrician as I was growing up. And as I started to learn more about children and mental health as I got into college, I became more passionate about working with children just because I noticed in the Black community that a lot of times that children have these difficulties or challenges, whether it's related to things like ADHD or behavior issues. And sometimes they don't get the help that they need. And obviously, there can be a lot of reasons for that. Therapy is not cheap. Can be very expensive for a lot of families. And so that could be a reason for them not getting help. But I noticed that, these families weren't getting the help that they need. And sometimes that when they were getting services, as I was working in a outpatient mental health clinic in college, I noticed that, sometimes the providers didn't have the best relationships with Black families. And so I wanted to enter into this field so that I could be a resource, be, increase the representation, as another Black male, as a Black therapist. And that's sort of how my passion has grown. So obviously, like, we know that the numbers are really small. So I jotted down some notes here because I was really curious about data. I always like data.
Me too.
So only about 24% of therapists are male. If you look at sort of race ethnicity breakdown, only 3 to 4%, either male or female are Black. And when we look at male therapists that are Black, the numbers go down to maybe 1 to 2%. And so it's a really small number. And so for me, that's one of the reasons why I'm really passionate about working with, Black boys in particular, because we know that oftentimes parents do want someone that looks like their son. And we know that that's hard to find, in many communities. So that's one of the reasons why I'm really passionate about working with this particular community.
Absolutely. You made great points about just in general how the Black community, we are, suffering in numbers as far as a representation of us. But even a lot of us that get into mental health, we're not doing one-on-one direct therapy, right? And so when you look at the numbers of that representation of males, especially for Black boys, it's not a lot. And when we're talking about one-on-one care too for Black boys, you kind of turn it like to like their mentor, their coach, right? Because for some
Yep.
of them, this may be one of the foundational healthy relationships that they have with an adult male for some of them. And for others, it's like they're able to see, if I take certain steps or I believe in myself, like I can be, just as impactful as a therapist that's sitting in front of me. And I think that's why it was important for us not only to create the weight room for Black and brown males and to design a space for them to feel safe, but also give Black boys a safe space to be. Um, because let's just be honest, like working with children, it's a specialty and it's a different type of compassion that some of us, we may not have as much grace for kids. And so the fact that you really want to be a part of children's lives and show them like, hey, mental health is scary, emotions are scary, but once you kind of get a handle of it, you're going to be okay. I think that's great. I worked
Yeah,
with kids
and to
before.
add to that too, there aren't a lot of therapists that work with kids, as you sort of mentioned. And so when I sometimes make referrals to in other states, like I can't find therapists that work with kids. And obviously, as I mentioned, the numbers for males, like that number is always challenging too. And I think the other thing too about it is we need to continue to have conversations about teaching boys that it's okay to talk about their emotions and feelings. And so
Yes.
I know sometimes I'll say this for myself, like that wasn't something that I, was encouraged to do as a kid, which probably was why I had some anger issues. So it's externalized as those emotions. But I think that's also one of the reasons why I enjoy working with this population, because I think it also models for them at a young age that it's okay to have a lot of different types of emotions and feelings, and that it's okay to sort of share those as well. So I appreciate when parents do encourage or decide to get their kids some help, because these are tools that they will need for the rest of their life.
Absolutely. So, one of the things that comes up with working with kids that sometimes clinicians struggle with, and we're going to get into more of it, is the parent sees a problem, right? They want to fix it immediately. The kid may say like they're fine and they're processing, but because they're not processing in the way that maybe a parent feels like is productive, or they want to put him in treatment, but they kind of look to the therapist as like the changer of the kid, right? Like I'm sending you my kid so that you can just fix whatever's going on, not realizing like that's kind of not what we do.
Yeah.
And in the weight room, and to be honest, in the weight room, and it's not just like an adolescent thing, like I get mothers of adult males, or teenage males, where they're like, hey, my son is going through some stuff, my nephew's going through some stuff, I want to get some more information so I can put them into therapy, but they're not interested. How do I know when it's right to approach this conversation? How do I convince them that therapy is the right thing for them? So I wanted to spend a little bit of time in talking about signs that your child, or the Black boy in your life may need therapy. A lot of times parents just know like something's up, and because they won't talk to them, they just think that maybe talking to a professional would be the best route. So, can you talk a little bit about some things that you may see? And this is not like the greatest checklist, right? Like, just because we
Yeah.
mention these things doesn't mean like if everything is on this list, that means go run to a therapist. But it's just some things to keep in mind that it'll be a good time to discuss with your child about going into therapy versus, maybe going into like a support group or something. So, what are some things that parents can kind of think about having this conversation with their child about therapy?
Yeah. So I think I'll answer your question, but I also want to bring up a point that I think is um, important to have in around this topic, in that we don't focus a lot on prevention. And so for me, I think
Yes.
that any child can benefit, obviously like adults too, but I think any child can benefit from therapy, because it shouldn't always be just to use when you like are having this challenge or difficulty. Like there can be ways that you could be proactive to learn what are some tools that I can use to
Mm-hmm.
deal with different types of issues in life. So that way, when those things do happen, that you have something in your toolkit, so to speak, to help you manage those things. So I think that it is helpful for us to begin to think about what are the ways that we can be proactive and preventative in terms of using mental health services. And maybe it's that you are only going on a sort of a temporary basis to sort of get some of those tools so that you have them. And then if there's a crisis that comes up, then maybe you can try those tools out. And if that's not helping, then you can sort of go in to get, some more in-depth, help on a regular basis with the therapist. But I think going back to your question, one of the things that I oftentimes talk about is you do need to monitor and watch your child's behavior. Sometimes you're not going to always communicate, when they may be struggling, especially if they are a younger child. I mean, adolescents, they may be more like to verbalize those things, but we know most children don't have the language to say, hey, I want to go talk to a therapist or I want to go get some help. They're probably going to just deal with the sadness that they're experiencing, deal with the anxiety or worries or fears that they're experiencing, lash out in sort of anger problems that they may be having, or just have difficulties managing some symptoms that may be related to things like ADHD. So I think for me, one of the things that I oftentimes, talk with parents about is you need to consistently monitor your child's behaviors and emotions. And so if you notice some changes in those things, that may be a sign for you to be able to sort of get help, and really sort of um, recognize that as a parent, like you know your child, like their personality, so you know what is quote unquote normal for them, and so what may be normal for another child may not be the norm for your child. And so realize when those things sort of go off of that sort of extreme of what's their sort of typical behavior. So some of the things that I, tell parents to look out for are increases in, emotional expression. So anger, sadness, frustration, those types of things that you see that are happening on a consistent basis, so daily or weekly, and that those things are beginning to cause problems either for the child or for others around them. So if you notice that those things are causing problems for you, to help them manage and cope with it, this might be the time that you want to go get some professional help and go to therapy. Monitor some of their eating and sleeping problems. Those are really important aspects of our life because it helps us function in a lot of different ways. And so definitely note, if your child is not eating enough, if they're eating too much, if they're having, sleeping, too much or not enough, those are also going to be some warning signs that you want to be able to watch out for, as well. And then I think a big one too, particularly for school age children, is noting when you see some academic struggles that are showing up. So regardless of if they were ABC, student, that when you see changes in their grades or their ability to, complete work on time, etc., those might be some warning signs that something else is going on. And, there are times where I will talk with parents, and notice that the child is not completing homework or they're having difficulties, getting homework done. It might be anxiety. It may not always be just they have educational problems. So really, understanding that there are a lot of ways that these things show up for kids, and that sometimes you may not have the answer as a parent, but if you can get some help, from a therapist, then they can be able to sort of check to see, are these things sort of normal, or are these things that you should be more concerned about?
Absolutely. You made up some really great points and checks that parents should consider. And also, too, I think we talk about like the social aspect of Black boys. Like, if they're not, like, they're, really engaging with their friends in sports and that kind of changes, or the things that they used to play with, it doesn't have as much meaning. Like, if they say, you can give it to my friend, I don't care. Like, those are also some really good signs to see, like, something is not connecting with them, the things that they once had pleasure in is no longer. And that's also some of the things that we see when we talk about suicide prevention in Black boys, as well as when their social aspect diminishes and they're usually an active person.
Yeah.
That is a great large area of concern. um, we're going to talk a little bit about conversation tips later for how to introduce the concept, to your kids and things like that. And I forgot to mention that if you guys have any questions or anything, go ahead and hit the chat box and we will get to that at the end of our presentation. So since we talked about some signs, right, that the child may need therapy, we also talked about that prevention part. So do you think there's a big difference, and not a big difference, but say maybe a child is like, I'm fine, you keep bothering me, I'm okay, I'm just trying to say to myself that the tips and stuff that you're talking about, therapy may be an intensive part of the process of helping them. What are some other things like group work or coaching mechanisms that may be like a stepping stone to getting the child familiar with the therapist, right? Because sometimes children look at therapists as another authority figure that's in their business. If anything, I've learned from children and teens is that they feel like adults are always trying to be invasive and all up in their business and want to know more of the tea than actually help them, especially like school settings. So sometimes maybe that one-on-one attention with a therapist, they may not be at that level, but obviously they need something. So do you have any thoughts about if therapy is maybe too much? What are some things I can give them, like a milder form or introduction to having that relationship with a mental health professional?
Yeah. So I think, one thing that I encourage people to think about, especially, let's say they may be concerned about paying, out of pocket for therapy, or they can't find someone, in their insurance network at the time and they have to wait some time, and see what resources the school has. So, I mean, most schools have some type of counseling services available. So I think that that can be sort of a way to at least get experience working with a mental health professional or a therapist to see, like, hey, is this something that I might like a little bit? So that way they can at least set up those, counseling sessions at school to meet with the therapist to talk about certain things that they may be dealing with. So parents might want to sort of use that as a stepping stone to see, is this something that my child at least finds of use to them,
Yes.
or that it helps on some level to provide some type of support to them. And then obviously, one of the things that I think we've done through the weight room is to have some types of group setting. So we know for some kids that the one-on-one thing may not be as interesting to them because they may be introverted, or they're not very talkative. And
Yes.
so I think one of the benefits of groups, support groups, therapy groups, is that they can attend those spaces, they can learn, but they don't have to always be the one that sort of speaks up, or shares as much. So I think those are other ways that parents can think about giving their kids some type of experience or exposure to therapy, is seeing what types of groups are available where their child can be able to sort of get some connection with the therapist or professional, to see, is this something that they might enjoy, where they may not be sort of the sole focus of what that therapeutic relationship is like.
Yeah, those are great tips, especially with the school setting, the support groups. Because, like you said, sometimes it feels kind of awkward being like, my parents think I have a problem and I don't. But being around other, kids or adolescents that are like, hey, my parents think I'm tripping too, but I'm here. So they have that bonding experience. Or like, hey, you know what? I didn't need this, but the fact that I was here and you taught me how to like listen to music and take my lyrics down, like that wasn't like the worst thing you could have said to me. So I guess like this was worth it. Like, Boys have a way of being like, I didn't want to be here, but it ended up being a good thing to be a part of. And another thing I will say too about therapy is that there's a notion like you have to be in therapy for the rest of your life, every
Mhm.
week for the rest of your life, right? And it's simply just not the case. Of course, as a therapist, we come together and we decide what's a good treatment plan, but sometimes therapy is a slow progression. And so it may start off that the child only wants to be seen once a month or every other week, or they may want to take a break. And so just having that patience, that urgency is not going to solve the problems immediately. That building the rapport with your child is more important to us than just throwing out interventions, right? That we got to let them know this is a safe space for them to talk. And we're going to talk about why that's important in this next topic, because a lot of times in the mental health professional, we want to help children, we want to help families, but sometimes I think we parents really don't understand their role in
Mhm.
their child's treatment, and what are they supposed to be doing and what's not helpful to the process. So parents, hopefully you're not disappointed in any way if you feel slighted about what we're going to talk about, but it's important to know, what is your support level as far as in the therapy room. So let's talk about parents' role in child's therapy treatment. So the things that we hear in the mental health field is that parents just drop their kids off for the hour and they go to Target, they go to Starbucks. It's like their little self-care moment. They come back and they're like, is Billy all good to go? Cool. They come back next week. Hey, Billy had another outburst. I thought you was, fixing him. What's going on, right? Or some parents unintentionally try to use us as like a monitoring person of, hey, what did they tell you in session, tell me everything. Like we're kind of like that gatekeeper of like, we have all the kids information and so the parent wants to know. And that can create an issue in the room, right? Because the teen boys and boys, they want to know that what I tell you is going to stay right here. You're not going to go tell my mom, you're not going to tell my dad. And of course, mandated reporting, some of that stuff, we got to handle that. But for the most part, we try to keep that, that sacredness in our sessions. So Dr. Earl, tell us, what is the role for the parents in their child's therapy? What are they supposed to be doing?
Yeah, no, you brought up a lot of points, and actually, I'm teaching a class with our practicum students recently, and so they had a conversation about how sometimes parents do like they just drop their kids off or they log their kids in if it's a virtual space, and then they don't get as involved in that relationship. And obviously, I've had situations where parents tell me that sometimes therapists exclude them from the process too. So that's
Mm-hmm.
another issue that sometimes comes up. But one of the things I think is helpful is that parents obviously play a role. That role may differ depending on the age of the child. At least my clients that I work with. But I do think that it is important for parents to understand that they also contribute to how we work with their kids and also how their kids may use the tools and skills that we work with them on outside of sessions. So, in terms of parents' role, I have what I call the 3 M's.
Oh,
Of
what's the three M's?
so I
Take
coined
notes, everybody. Take notes. Three M's.
these 3 M's are monitoring, modeling, and motivating.
Ooh.
So monitoring in that you want to monitor your child's emotions and behaviors outside of session. So if let's say the focus of treatment is working on issues related to suicide, for example, like your role outside of session as a parent is to continue to monitor, is your child having any suicidal ideations? Are they engaging in some suicide, related types of behaviors in terms of like, harming themselves in some type of way? You mentioned earlier about their kids, not caring if you give their toys away to someone else. Those types of things that you want to be mindful of as it relates to your child. So a huge part of it is, we as the therapist, we need to know what happens outside of our therapy rooms. And part of that sometimes is, kids are not going to always communicate everything to us in terms of their struggling. Sometimes they don't remember. Sometimes they just don't want to share certain things. And so it's helpful for parents to at least have some awareness about what's going on, so they can also inform us about, what their child's emotions and their behaviors have been like, in between the session appointments. So that's the first M, is monitoring. The second M is modeling. And so for me, particularly working with younger children, I know that the things that we do in session to learn how to, like, cope with their anxiety or cope with their anger, that's that 1 hour that we work together per week. And so there are 6 other days in the week that you need to also practice those skills. And so there are times where it is really pivotal and important for parents to also model some of those things for their child about how to cope with different situations. Not to say that these are things that you struggle with as a parent, but it may be helpful for you to, like, sit with your kid at some point throughout the week to say, oh, last week in therapy you were working on, how to practice breathing exercises. So can you show me, like, what does that look like? How do you do that? I want to learn how to do that too. And maybe you can sit with your kid and practice that skill. And then there may be points throughout the week where you can say, oh, I'm really stressed out today, so I'm going to practice how to use my breathing exercises. And so those things are going to be really helpful to show the kid, that this is how you use this skill that you just learned. And also, get that repetition, which we know is important for us to learn, new things and new skills, and that we can't just expect someone to do something once and then voila, they've learned how to do this. So obviously for, kids that are in sports or boys that are in sports, we know as parents, like, you take them to practice, on a weekly or even sometimes, a couple times a week to practice those skills so they can know how to perform on the field or on the court. And so the same thing happens, for me in terms of, like, this therapy relationship. You need to practice those skills. And so for parents, helping to model those things are going to be really important. And then the third M is motivating. So um, obviously sometimes for adolescents, they can be a tough crowd, and they don't want to go to therapy, and sometimes it's because they're being forced to go to therapy by their
Yes.
parents, and so they don't feel there's a need for it. But I think being able to encourage them, to use the space and use that time, and that's time for them. And going back to your point that you mentioned earlier, I try to make sure that both my adolescent clients as well as the parents understand the limits of confidentiality, and so that if there are things where the child is going to be harming themselves, that I want to be able to sort of make sure that parents are sort of going to be aware about those things. But at other times, there may be things that they share with me that may not necessarily need to be disclosed to the parent. And so I want to make sure that parents also understand that, they're okay with certain things, particularly as it relates to, certain laws. Depending on what state you're in, parents have the right to know everything about, what's going on in their child's therapy session. And so I just want to make sure that the child and the parent know that, hey, are you okay as a parent with, things being kept, private, so to speak, as it relates to the therapy sessions, outside of me making sure parents know what the goals of treatment are and what we're working on, and also if there are issues that come up as it relates to harm.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes for parents it's really challenging for them to um figure out the boundaries of, like, I'm being a support to you, whatever you talk to me, we can work it out, versus like feeling like they have to act upon it with, like, I don't want to say like a consequence measure, but like, hey, you shouldn't have been doing that. It's like, now I gotta punish you. It's like, you know, teens and children don't know when they can come and tell you something without getting in trouble. Like some things, it's like they want to share with you because they want you to know what's going on, but they don't always want to be reprimanded for it. So I think sometimes parents have that uncomfortable balance of like when to parent and when to be a support. But I think that's also something that I love that we do in the weight room for most of our under 18 crowd, is that we usually check in with parent at the beginning, like, hey, is there anything that you want to mention, anything that stood out to you? But they're telling them in front of the child, right? Because we're creating like this team dynamic. And then, the parent, will go do their thing while we have confidential time with, the child or the teen. And then a few minutes wrapping up, we kind of just briefly say, hey, today's session, we talked about going to bed 30 minutes early. So, just as accountability, kind of just talk to him, gently or whatever, and making sure that he stays in that goal. So that's
Yeah.
one thing that I think that I'm proud of us at the weight room, is that we do incorporate parents, and the parents that we help provide services with their child or teen with do appreciate that we walk through the steps of like, this is your responsibility, this is what we'll take care of. If he wants to share, we'll open up a space if he wants to share that with you. Otherwise, we're just going to keep that in our session. And it seems like for the most part, parents have been really receptive to our style of treatment. They just don't want to
Yeah.
be left in the dark.
Absolutely. And also, I think too, I also have conversations with parents and the teens too, to let them know, like, if the teen does want to share, think like they can also do that. It's not that they can't, but I think it is important, as you mentioned, for parents to not feel like we're like gatekeeping whatever sort of emotional or things that are going on with the child, so that we sort of report back to them, when those things are happening, that so that they can sort of know like everything about their child's life, which you should know, and can be okay, but also understanding, like, particularly for teens, like they're at this stage where they're growing up, they're trying to be independent, and so you want to be able to support them in a healthy way to be able to do that.
Absolutely. It's not, yeah, therapists, we're not like, I know something you don't know. Like, that's not our intentions of holding that safe space for your child. Is that we just want them to be able to express themselves authentically and know like what we're talking about is not going to be used against them, because
Yeah.
it just kind of comes up in childhood. Like, if I tell my parents something, I'm like, well, remember when you did this and remember when you did that. Just sometimes, for teens and kids, like, that is not the most helpful tool for them, right? So hopefully, parents, you didn't feel like you got beat up too much in that conversation about your role. But I mean, it's new territory, right? The initial decision to put your child in therapy is one thing. It's uncomfortable, it's scary, you see something's wrong. And with a lot of parents, I mean, anybody you love, you just want to fix it.
Yeah.
I see what the issue is, I've been there before, like, I just don't want them to hurt. And unfortunately, as parents and people that we love, we can't always stop the hurt, but we can give them the space, the compassion, and the tools to navigate that hurt. Another thing, parents, I will just casually mention is to be mindful of when a child is giving you some information about themselves. Please do not follow what you got to be depressed about. When I was your age, I had to walk 50 miles, one way to school and back, and I had to pay bills. You don't got to do any of that. Like, honestly, as an adult today, the things that our children and our teens go through, especially like in high school and stuff, couldn't imagine. I couldn't imagine bullying being 24/7. I can't imagine being so exposed to. I mean, I had social media was in high school, but so much exposed that when they come home, they're just heavy. So even though you may not can relate to their ideal situations in this moment, or it seems very mild compared to what you went through, it may be the biggest impact in their world. And everything that they tell us, we should take it for consideration of that's their truth, and it's a big deal for them.
Yeah. I feel dated now because you're like, anyways, I did not have social media. But that's the world that our kids grow up in today. And so I think, the Surgeon General just released a report a couple of weeks ago about how social media is impacting our kids' mental health. And so we know that they are dealing with a lot of things on a consistent basis. And bullying is one of those. We also know, like, there's this exposure to a lot of body image expectations. And obviously, like, there have always been expectations in like magazines and TV, et cetera. But I think now that we have influencers on social media, that's also another way that sometimes can be impacting our teens as well, especially our teen girls.
Absolutely. And so when they're telling you like, oh, I saw this on TikTok, or like, well, get off that social media. It's just that simple. It's like it's really not. Like, social media has been embedded into their lifestyle. And so instead of like dismissing it, you better start learning about it and understanding how it's impacting your teen and your child. And I promise you, like, if you can relate to them or understand them on that level, the communication between you and your child will go up so much. And you're like, all I had to do was learn what you're seeing on social media and being like, yeah, that's rough. That validation, it goes a long way, instead of being like, when I was a kid, I had it. Like,
Right.
okay, we understand. We do. But for your child, they're looking for one thing. And also too, A big part of that is also asking your child, like, do you want feedback? Is this something you want me to help you with? Because sometimes they just want to tell you something without you, momming them or dadding them or giving them advice. Like, they just kind of want to tell you what's in their world.
Yeah.
Kids will tell you what they need if you just listen.
Agreed.
For real. And if they keep getting stomach aches too, and ginger ale is not helping, there's some things going on. So just keeping in mind of all those things. I hope this conversation about parents and, what's your role in their treatment was really helpful. So now we're going to roll into conversation tips. So, Dr. Earl, you got, this 12-year-old who, keeps saying they got migraines, their stomach hurts. They're getting calls, parents are getting calls at school about how they're not doing their homework. And when somebody talks to them, they're kind of snappy. And when they talk to their child, they're like, I just had a bad day. Like, it's not a big deal. I don't want to go talk to some old man, literally, some old man about my problems, right? Like, I'm good. So, sometimes parents are just going to have to put their kids in therapy whether they want it or not, because it is at that point. But sometimes we can get to a level where it's a decision together versus just, I'm going to tell you, you got to go do this.
Yeah.
So what are some conversation tips to start with on how to introduce the concept of therapy to your youngin?
Yeah. I mean, that's a tough one. So obviously I don't know if there's a perfect answer to that. And I'm not going to say I have all the answers. But I do think that it is important to, one, let your child know that they are going. I've had some situations where parents just sort of bring their kids and the kid doesn't know like why they're there. So I think at least have some conversation with them about why you see benefit in them going to therapy and how it can be helpful. So this is what mom or dad thinks about, why therapy can be helpful for you. And as you sort of touched on earlier too, I think really trying to avoid like using therapy as a punishment, so to speak, in that,
Yes.
you're causing these problems, so I'm taking you to therapy. You're going to deal with this, type of issue. So I think that's definitely going to make the child, put up some walls in that situation, and they're not going to want to be able to sort of to go to therapy or even have, some disclosure and talk to the therapist about certain things because they're like, I don't know why I'm here or I don't want to be here. They're making me come because of XYZ. So I do think that it is helpful that you talk with them about this is why I think, you can be it can be helpful for you. And so, give it a try. And if it doesn't work, then we can think about other ways. So I think giving them some options about if this is not going to work or if that person isn't going to work, because we all know that the way that you form a relationship with your therapist is important, and sometimes that connection isn't there and you don't click. And so I think it can be tricky for a child to be in a situation where like they don't feel comfortable with that person, and you're making them like, well, you have to go whether you like it or not. So I think giving them that option to say, hey, try it out. If you don't like it, then we can figure out, some other things. And maybe it's, it takes time for you to find another therapist, but, at least they're not feeling forced in that situation. I also think it's helpful to try to identify with the child what
Yes.
they can be able to sort of work on, particularly I think for teens. And so I do that with my own clients, is making sure that we can make sure that if I see, I did an assessment or I understood like these are the goals that I think might be helpful for you, given some of the challenges or difficulties that you're working with. I want to focus on this as part of as the therapy goal, but I also want you to identify for yourself how do you want to use this time. And so I think having that conversation with your child to say, I think you should go, work with a therapist. What would you like to talk with that person about? And really try to normalize it too, so that
Mm-hmm.
like it is something that is acceptable to do. I know we've had a lot of conversations about therapy, and it's a very common term that we use now. And apparently, people are requiring their friends to be in therapy. I came across a post recently. I was like, wait, people are really doing this. So it's becoming to be commonplace that people go to therapy. So I think, trying to normalize it for kids to say that, just like you go to the doctor to get checkups, like I think you can go to a therapist and get a checkup to see, hey, are there things that you could do differently or do better? And that I think is another sort of way to be able to talk with teens about that. Um, Also, I think trying to gauge, if you make a decision for the child to go to therapy, to see if they want to try something where they meet with someone in person and go to their office, or if they feel more comfortable doing it in their room or at home on a computer, because I think that can also make a difference for the child to be like they might feel more comfortable, doing virtual therapies like we do through the weight room, or they might want to actually go into a physical office because they feel like they can talk better with someone when they're in person as opposed to over a screen. So I think giving some kids options too to say, you know, what do you think? So I want to take you to therapy. Would you think it'd be better for you to talk with somebody, in their office or in a therapy room, or would it be better for you to do it, at home where it's easy and you don't have to worry about, going to a space where you might feel uncomfortable, but you're in your own, living room, dining room, bedroom, wherever the place you decide, to have your therapy session. So I think those are some things that parents can um, use as ways to sort of have that conversation with kids as well. And then I think the other thing too here is talking with kids about how therapy can help. So letting them
Mhm.
know, like maybe you've had your own therapy. Again, it's becoming very common, and so you might want to share with them, like, hey, I have a therapist. I've been to therapy before too to help me better learn. How to, when I worry and get stressed out, what can I do to help myself feel better? So I think there can be ways that you can use this to, learn how to, get along better with your friends, or how to cope with your sadness, or how to deal with grief if they've lost, a loved one. Or even as we sort of see, sometimes kids are emotionally affected by death of celebrities or people that they know. So
Mhm.
there might be some other things that you can say, this can be, a therapist can be somebody that you can talk to about, why this person was important to you, and why you feel sad, and what you can do to help yourself sort of feel better. So I think those are a couple of things that sort of come to mind in terms of how do you start a conversation with kids about the benefits of therapy.
Yeah, and pretty much what your suggestions were is to allow the child to have some power. I want to say, like, in a decision and the process and the style of therapy, like it's not just something like I'm taking you somewhere and you better do it. It's like, hey, we're gonna try this person out. If you don't feel like it's a fit or whatever, we can try someone else. Or hey, I know it may be tough to talk today, but this is your space to use it however you want to. And also, sometimes, for parents to say, like, hey, I just noticed, like, something has changed within you, and you're telling me you're fine, but I can just see that you're not. And it's okay if you don't feel ready to share that with me, but there are people out there that won't tell me your business, or they won't judge you. That maybe that's a place that we can start to figure out conversations that maybe I can be supportive of, because I think with children, like, they sometimes think that therapy, like you said, is a punishment, and we really want to debunk that. Therapy should not be a punishment. It should be something that they feel actively engaged in, and they feel like they have power and say and support in their session. But sometimes they don't look at it as like, this is another way for me to have an outlet where I don't feel like I'm being judged by my parents. Because no matter how much you can say, I love you, I support you, there is a measurement that children, they don't want to disappoint their parents. And so letting them know, like, this is a space for them to just be and to talk, whether it's listening to music, play therapy, art therapy, whatever the case may be, that, hey, I just noticed. And, if you don't want to talk about it right now, we can wait till another time. But I just noticed that you're not okay. And there are things that, I can help, get you to where you can feel safe to talk about those things with someone.
Yeah, and two, the point that you mentioned about them not upsetting their parents. I mean, obviously, I think kids look up to their parents, and they want to do well generally, and they want to feel like they're not making their parents look bad sometimes because we've
Yes.
said don't make me look bad. Or I think that sometimes kids also feel that if there are difficulties that they're going through, particularly as it comes to things like suicidal ideations and wanting to hurt themselves, that they are afraid to acknowledge those things to their parents because their parents might freak out because they don't know what to do. And sometimes, they are afraid to share those types of things too. So I think that's another thing that sometimes prevents kids from maybe opening up about certain issues to their parents.
Yeah. So hopefully these conversation tips were helpful. Like I said, it's to each its own. But the conversation doesn't have to be scary. It could be something that's uplifting. It can be supportive. Sometimes you may have to have the conversation a couple of times before, the child feels like they're more on board, or, sometimes it's not really up to them depending on the severity of their symptoms. Something has to change, but it's something that it may take, some compassion and some time to navigate.
Yeah.
And the fact that you open the door for the child, some of them are like, yeah, I definitely need that. Like Dr. O said, nowadays, I want to look up that article about now friends are requiring friends to go to therapy. I mean, I just learned about friends requiring calendar invites for social outings. So I definitely think that the whole therapy concept of everybody needs a safe space to talk is definitely getting through to our younger generation. So hopefully these tips were really helpful for the parents in the audience. We're going to spend a couple of minutes on just some resources that we have, and then we do have a question. Um, so we do offer support groups, therapy in the waiver room, like we said, 6 states. Dr. O specifically for our Virginia State clients, so adolescents and adults. The really cool thing that Dr. Earl and I have developed is an adolescent male group that is specifically designed for Black and Brown adolescent males to come in and get some tools and tips about their emotional regulation, whether they're sad, angry, not knowing what they feel. There's things that they can do every day to help themselves. And we actually had a successful group completed not that long ago. And so, of course, without not going into too much detail, Dr. O, how was that experience in helping your small group with some of the things that boys just deal with as far as emotional dysregulation? How did they respond to your support of their needs?
Yeah, no, the group went really well. And so I think one of the things that we sort of decided on the group was that we wanted to one just sort of create this space for them so that they could talk about things that they may be dealing with or struggling with. And I think that was one of the helpful components of that, is that if there were struggles or challenges that they wanted to sort of talk about, and maybe they didn't want to talk about it with their parents or even their friends, that was the space that they could be able to sort of do that in a way to sort of share, because we all know that having that support to talk about things can be really, really helpful. The other piece that sort of the group helps for is just sort of giving kids some tools. And so this was for teenagers, so 13 to 17. And as I sort of talked about earlier, having some tools in your toolkit, so to speak, to sort of cope with things are helpful. And so one of the things that we did over the course of the group was really just sort of talk about some general tools that can be useful for you. So one, like we all experience stress at some point, right? So really having kids learn, one, how do you identify stress for yourself? Like everybody experiences stress differently. So being able to talk about, how does stress show up for you or how does stress show up in your body? I think that is really helpful for people to sort of know. And then how do you cope with different types of stressors? What are the things that you can do? So being able to give them some of those things and practice some of those things, I think, was really helpful as well. And then just being able to sort of identify, for you as well, what we consider to be sort of healthy or unhealthy types of coping tools. So let's identify those for yourself and also figure out like, what are the things that you can do, as you mentioned, often. So, this idea about self-care is something that we talk a lot about. And so I think for kids too, like really learning what are the ways that you can try to take care of yourself on a regular, consistent basis so that it helps you to reduce some of these, challenges as it relates to stress or being irritable or whatever the sort of situation is. And so I think that that was also a really helpful piece about the group, is just sort of having that opportunity to say, hey, these are things that I can do, throughout my life or throughout my week or whatever, when different challenges sort of arise for me. So those were some of the things that stood out for me, from the group.
And also, what I loved about our group, and I think what I love about the weight room, is that we're not all about like quantity, it's about quality, right? So our groups are really small, which creates a really comfortable dynamic, because sometimes, popping up on a group and you don't know who's going to be there and what to say, that can be very intimidating. So we keep it very intimate. What I liked about it was too is that because it was a psycho educational group, we were able to open it nationwide. So we had, boys that were not just all in the same state or city, like they were coming from all over. And it was a great introduction to talking to a mental health professional. The participants that we had in the group, some of them had never talked to a therapist before, or they had been therapy before, but they kind of wanted a break. And so it was nice to find that balance of like, hey, talking to a therapist is not really scary. Because I mean, who wouldn't want to talk to Dr. Earl? Like, he has a lot of techniques. He's very easy to talk to. Like, it was a really great introduction to like how it feels to talk to a professional. It doesn't feel like a teacher. It doesn't feel like a parent. It feels like somebody that's really listening to you. So that's a great aspect of our group, is that it's good for, your teen that maybe is not ready for that one-on-one, or it may be a great addition to what they're already working on wherever they're at in their mental health journey. It was impactful, for them to find tools that'll work for them. So I know that we're going to bring the group back in the fall. We haven't set dates yet, but if you guys are interested in signing up your teen, it is nationwide, because it's not a therapy group, it's an educational group, support group. You see our website at the bottom. Feel free to fill out our contact information. And as soon as we get our dates up and rolling again, we will be sending out an announcement of when our group is coming back. Also, because Dr. Earl got a lot of things going on. He has therapy for Black kids. So if you are looking for some extra tips or things that we kind of talked about today on how to navigate supporting your kid through therapy, you can locate this website with the blog, and we will also have it on our YouTube page, so you can just click on it easily. But this is a really great article that's a very easy read on how to navigate some of the things that we talked about today. So thank you for sharing that, Dr. Earl.
Absolutely.
We do have one question, so I'm going to let y'all capture that website before I post our question. But I do want to thank everybody thus far for attending and listening to our conversation. If you guys are ever interested in services, not only do we do therapy and support groups, we do have workshops coming. And we have some other things that are coming down the pipeline of just being a full-fledged mental wellness practice for Black and brown males. We are more than therapy. Mental wellness is more than therapy. So make sure that you guys click on our website to stay in contact. Alrighty, so this is the question that we have. B U of A wants to know: can y'all speak to the dynamics with a co-parent when your teen is in therapy? It's tough when both parents love the child very much and are supportive, but have a hard time agreeing on other stuff. What a heavy question that I don't know about you, Dr. Earl, but this has definitely been asked on different platforms. So while we may not could give specific detailed information to your specific need, we can generalize what are some thoughts on maybe a little bit of tips on how to navigate those process of being a co-parent.
Yeah. No, that's a great question. Ironically, I mean, I talk about co-parenting from time to time with clients, but I did a media interview a couple of years ago related to this. And one of the things that I had made a point about was how when you're co-parenting, obviously, as the question mentioned, you care for your child, you both feel love the child, but sometimes you don't have the best relationship with the other parent, or you disagree with sort of their style of parenting, whatever the issue is. I think that it's helpful for you to figure out how you can work together, obviously. And so part of my response is that really think about how you interact with the other parent, the co-parent, quote unquote, in ways that you put your feelings and emotions aside, which is not our nature necessarily as human beings, but for the sake of the child, that you think about this as a business relationship. Like, you're both invested in ensuring that your child is cared for and that they have the best
Mhm.
outcomes in their life. And so making sure that both of you think about that as you sort of negotiate what needs to happen in the best interest of the child. And so that would be sort of my suggestion, is to really think about, let's come to an agreement on, like, what does this child need, regardless of whether we feel that it's important. Because sometimes I think, as as parents, like, we decide things because we just don't want to agree to it because the other parent made the idea point. And
Yeah.
so I think in those situations, step outside of that moment. Like, it's not about you as the parent, it's about the child. And try to separate those two. As long as the person isn't making a sort of quote unquote bad decision for the child. Try to do what's best, and sometimes that requires you to put your own feelings and emotions aside as it relates to the other parent.
Absolutely. And I think you made up a great point that sometimes decisions are made based off of where the issue or the concern comes from, and that's the other parent, right? And so, when it comes to co-parenting, some of the things that I provide as support to my clients as an MFT is that you're not coming into a situation to be right. You're coming into a situation to, come to a solution. And the solution is not always you being right. It may be a collaborative effort. And so if you're going in there power struggling of like, this is what I think needs to happen, so we're going to make it happen, you're already going to hit a brick wall. So you're going into it trying to find something that works for the child versus like being the right fighter. Being a right fighter doesn't always get you anywhere. And sometimes in co-parenting, emotions are high because they are, operating in two different households or situations. So you're not going to agree on life with a co-parent sometimes, and that's fine. But as long as you can find a way where it meets the child's need versus your own needs, sometimes that's really a helpful piece in co-parenting, because co-parenting is hard, period. And then when you got two different, like, your child literally has two different households and lifestyles, it can be really hard to bridge the two.
Yeah.
So that's an MFT solution. So hopefully that was helpful. Good question though. I love the co-parenting questions. We have another question. I'm not gonna post it because I don't know if this person wants their name, so it's their full name. But they wanted to know: do we have any tips or reading materials for helping kids with a parent diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder?
That's a tough one. One, because I'm not an expert on narcissism, nor have I worked with a lot of parents that have experienced that. Um, I mean, obviously, like, you probably have done this yourself, the person that asked the question. So I just Googled a resource. And so I think that, is one way to find some information out there. I'm going to post this link in the chat. I don't have access to the window, but maybe Dr. Patrice, you can post that link about how to help a child cope with a narcissistic parent. So it seems like there's a couple of resources that are listed there. There's also some references that have some books and things that are posted at the end of that blog post. So that might be one resource that could be useful for you to look about what are some ways to support a child who has a narcissistic parent.
And also, there are mental health providers that specialize in this. One that comes to mind is Dr. Natalie Jones.
Mm.
She is in Northern California. She actually has a podcast that talks about various type of individuals that have narcissistic personality disorder, signs and things like that. So that would be a really great resource. Let me see if I can type in her name. And I mean, she's Googleable. Um, I want to say she's an LPC as well as a doctor. So I would say, ooh, I didn't even spell Jones right. It's Dr. Natalie Jones. Let me type that in there. Um, oh, it's not letting me. Okay, Dr. Natalie Jones. Like I said, she's in Northern California. She's a great colleague. She really goes into really great detail to give a lot of information about how to navigate these things, not just from like a child perspective, but even like an adult child dealing with a parent that way. So
Mm,
whatever resources that she provides on her website or her podcast, I would say that that is a really good place to get started.
yeah, for sure.
So, Dr. Earl, how did you feel about our conversation today? I mean, the time flew by, but I felt like it was a really good conversation. Do you have any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Yeah, no, it went well. You posted the blog to the website. I will also share the other link to Therapy for Black Kids website. So if people are looking for other resources, you can also visit that link. And so there's some listings there, which obviously again, like Google is our friend. Um, you can also find those resources on the website that just sort of list some directories that can be helpful for people. So think about that as another tool. And then for parents that are looking for resources, we know that the Boris Henson Foundation offers some resources. So I know sometimes people can't find affordable services, and so they offer some like scholarships and things like that for people to be able to access therapy. So I just wanted to sort of mention that.
In the Coma Project too, I think it starts at age 12. They're specifically designed. They're not a voucher program. I always want to make sure I'm clear on that. They're not a voucher program, but they do offer for those that have not tried therapy before 5 sessions for virtual. They don't cover in person, but I do know that they have ramped up their accessibility to our adolescents. So which is really cool. And I believe they help out in all states. The weight room is actually a provider for them as well. So that's a really cool resource as well. So there are nonprofits out here, foundations that are really trying to make therapy accessible and affordable for all members of the family, which we really appreciate.
Yep.
Alrighty, well, Dr. Earl, it was a pleasure having you today. Of course, this is like one of many conversations that we're probably going to have. But feel free to check out Dr. Earl on all his social media handles. I think all of your handles are Dr. Earl Turner, right?
Yep,
So
that's it.
Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. Like, what else am I missing? I think that's all of them. Therapy for Black Kids also has their own website and their own social media handles. And it's the full word Black, right? Therapy for
It
Black
is.
Kids. Okay.
Yes. We're on Facebook and Instagram.
Instagram. So yes, make sure you follow Dr. Earl as he's gonna leave here and probably do more amazing things. So make sure you stay current with his journey of writing his second book and just all the amazing things that he has going on. I appreciate you taking time out to have
Thank
a
you.
conversation with me today, and we will see you all next time. Have a great day.